The first time my mother-in-law told me to leave her son, I thought she was angry. Maybe she had finally decided she didn't like me. I expected tears, accusations, maybe even insults. I wasn't prepared for the way she looked at me. She wasn't angry. She was terrified. And the strangest part was what she whispered before I walked out of her house. "If you love him, you'll leave him." My name is Claire, and I'd been married to Daniel for 4 years. From the outside, we had the kind of marriage people envied. We lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago, had good jobs, a comfortable house, and enough money to take a vacation every summer. Daniel was kind, patient, and never gave me a reason to doubt him. At least, that's what I believed. His mother, Margaret, had never been particularly warm toward me. She wasn't cruel, exactly. She simply kept her distance. At family dinners, she watched me more than she spoke to me. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at Daniel while he talked to me, as if she was trying to memorize every word he said. The change happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Margaret called and asked me to come to her house alone. She wouldn't tell me why. When I arrived, she was standing in the kitchen with both hands wrapped around a cup of untouched coffee. Her face looked pale. "Where's Daniel?" she asked. "At work," I said. She nodded slowly. "Good, then we need to talk." She didn't offer me coffee. She didn't ask how I'd been. Instead, she walked to the window and stared at the rain. "Claire, how much do you know about my son's past?" she asked. I laughed nervously. "Not much beyond what he's told me." Margaret turned around. "That's the problem." Then she looked directly into my eyes. "You know, almost nothing." I asked what she meant. She walked toward me and lowered her voice. "You need to leave Daniel." I actually thought I'd misunderstood her. "Excuse me?" She repeated it. "Leave him. File for divorce. Do it before he finds out." My heart started pounding. "Why?" I asked. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because if you stay, you may lose more than your marriage." I drove home in silence. I kept replaying her words. "If you love him, you'll leave him." What could she possibly know that I didn't? Daniel was already home when I arrived. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and asked how my day had been. I almost told him everything, but something stopped me. For the first time in 4 years, I wondered if my husband was hiding something from me. That night, Daniel fell asleep quickly. I stayed awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to believe Margaret was simply trying to destroy our marriage. Maybe she had never accepted me. Maybe she wanted her son back. But then I remembered her face. She hadn't looked jealous. She had looked afraid. And fear was much harder to dismiss. The next morning, I noticed something strange. Daniel left for work earlier than usual. Before he walked out, he checked his phone 3 times. "Everything okay?" I asked. He smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just work." Then he kissed me and left. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message appeared on the screen. "She knows." I froze. The message wasn't from a name I recognized. Just a number. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't need to. Another message appeared. "We need to talk before she tells him." My hands started shaking. Who was she? And what exactly did they think I knew? When Daniel returned home that evening, I watched him differently. He noticed. "Why are you looking at me like that?" I told him I was tired. He accepted the answer too easily. After dinner, I went upstairs and opened the drawer where we kept old documents. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that Margaret was wrong. And instead, I found something I had never seen before. An old insurance policy with Daniel's name on it. The policy wasn't unusual by itself. What caught my attention was the date. It had been issued 6 years before we met. Daniel was listed as the beneficiary, but the insured person's name was unfamiliar. A woman named Rebecca Hall. I had never heard that name in my life. I put the document back and told myself there had to be an innocent explanation. The next afternoon, Margaret called again. This time, she didn't ask me to come over. She said only, "Did you find it?" My stomach dropped. Find what? There was a long silence. Then she said, "Nothing." Forget I called. I asked her about Rebecca Hall. Margaret stopped breathing for a second. Where did you see that name? I told her about the insurance policy. She sounded frightened again. Claire, listen to me carefully. Do not ask Daniel about Rebecca. I asked why. She said, because he'll know I told you. Then the line went dead. I stared at my phone. Whatever this was, Margaret wasn't trying to break up my marriage for herself. She was protecting something. That night, I searched the name Rebecca Hall online. There were hundreds of results, but one photograph stopped me. Rebecca had been a young woman from Illinois who had disappeared 6 years earlier. The article said police had never found her. She had been 28. I looked at the screen until the words blurred. I couldn't breathe. 6 years ago. The same year as the insurance policy. The same year Daniel had supposedly been living alone after his previous relationship ended. I remembered him telling me he'd had a difficult year, but never explaining why. Now I wondered whether difficult was hiding something much darker. I called Margaret. She didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then, around midnight, someone knocked on our front door. Daniel was upstairs showering. I opened it and found an older man standing on the porch. He looked at me and said, "You're Claire, aren't you?" I nodded. He handed me a small envelope. "Your mother-in-law told me to give you this." Inside the envelope was a photograph. It showed Daniel standing beside Rebecca Hall. They looked younger, happy even. On the back, someone had written a date and 3 words. "He knows everything." I turned the photograph over again. My hands were trembling. The man on the porch had already disappeared. Daniel came downstairs and found me holding the photograph. His face changed instantly. Not confusion, not surprise, fear. He stared at Rebecca's picture for several seconds. Then he asked, "Where did you get that?" I said, "Your mother." He sat down slowly. "Claire, there's something I should have told you." I expected him to confess to an affair. Instead, he told me Rebecca had been his fiancée before me. They had planned to marry. Then, one night, she disappeared. Daniel said the police questioned him because he had been the last person known to see her. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. He looked down. "Because I thought the truth would destroy everything." I asked him what the truth was. He said he didn't know what happened to Rebecca. But there was one thing he had never told the police. The night she disappeared, she had called him from an unknown number. She said she had discovered something about his family. Then the call ended. He never heard from her again. I couldn't understand. What did she discover? Daniel shook his head. "I don't know." I stared at him. "Then why does your mother want me to leave you?" He looked at me for a long time. "Because she thinks Rebecca disappeared because of me." His voice broke on the last word. The next morning, Margaret finally agreed to see me. She looked exhausted. I placed the photograph on her kitchen table. "Tell me the truth." She closed her eyes. "Rebecca discovered that someone had been stealing money from our family business." I asked who. Margaret whispered, "My husband." Margaret's husband, Daniel's father, had died 2 years before I met Daniel. According to her, he had been involved in illegal financial dealings. Rebecca had discovered evidence and planned to expose him, but before she could, she vanished. Margaret believed Daniel had learned about his father's crimes and helped cover them up. I asked Margaret why she hadn't gone to the police. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, because I was afraid my son would be blamed for something he didn't do. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out an old notebook. But 6 months ago, I found this among my husband's things. The notebook contained dates, payments, names, and bank account numbers. Some entries were connected to Daniel, but one page was circled in red. Beside Daniel's name were the words, "If Rebecca talks, make sure Daniel takes the blame." I stared at the sentence. Daniel wasn't the mastermind. Someone had planned to make him the scapegoat. I asked Margaret why she believed I had to leave Daniel. She finally answered, Because whoever protected themselves back then is still alive. I felt a chill. Who? Margaret shook her head. I don't know. But someone has been watching our family again. That night, I noticed a black SUV parked across from our house. It had been there for nearly an hour. When I looked through the curtains, the driver lowered his head. I told Daniel. He immediately turned off the lights. Don't go near the windows, he whispered. That was when I realized he had seen the vehicle before. I asked him how many times. He hesitated. 3 times. He had seen someone watching our house and never told me. I felt betrayed all over again. Why didn't you tell me? He answered, because I was trying to protect you. I shook my head. You don't protect someone by keeping them blind. The following day, I found another envelope in our mailbox. There was no stamp and no name. Inside was a single photograph of me leaving work. The picture had been taken from across the street. On the back were 4 words, "You should have left." I showed Daniel. He went pale. Then he called someone I had never heard him contact before. It's happening again, he said. I demanded to know who he was calling. He refused to answer. 10 minutes later, he told me we needed to leave the house immediately. I asked where we were going. He said somewhere they can't find us. We drove to a small hotel outside the city. Daniel finally told me the full story. After Rebecca disappeared, he had spent years trying to find out what happened. He discovered that his father's business partner had been laundering money through fake companies. Rebecca had found the records. But she had also discovered something else. Someone inside the family was helping him. Who? I asked. Daniel looked at me. My uncle. His uncle had disappeared from the family years earlier. Everyone believed he had moved overseas. But Daniel had recently discovered he was back in the United States. And the strange part was that the person sending us warnings knew exactly where Daniel and I lived. I asked why his mother never told him. Daniel said Margaret believed his uncle had threatened the family. She had been protecting Daniel since Rebecca disappeared, and now she's trying to make me leave you, I said. Daniel nodded. Because she thinks you're being targeted because of me. For the first time, everything began to make sense. Margaret wasn't trying to destroy my marriage. She was trying to remove me from the danger surrounding it. But there was still one question I couldn't answer. If Rebecca had disappeared 6 years ago, where was she now? The answer came from a phone call. A woman called the hotel room. She said, "Only Claire?" I froze. "Who is this?" The woman whispered, "My name is Rebecca." I couldn't speak. Daniel stared at me. The voice continued, "Your mother-in-law was right. You need to leave Daniel." Then the line went silent. Daniel immediately tried to call the number back. It was disconnected. I asked how we could know it was really Rebecca. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his laptop and showed me an old photograph of Rebecca. The voice on the phone had sounded exactly like the woman in the recording he'd kept from their engagement. We contacted Margaret. When she heard Rebecca might be alive, she broke down. "I knew it," she whispered. She told us Rebecca had secretly contacted her once, years earlier. She had been hiding because she believed Daniel's uncle wanted her dead, but she had never revealed where she was. Then Margaret said something that changed everything. Rebecca wasn't the only person who discovered the truth. I asked what she meant. Your father-in-law wasn't stealing money alone. Someone else was helping him. I asked who. Margaret paused. Someone you see every week. I thought about everyone in our lives, Daniel's co-workers, his friends, our neighbors, family members. Then I remembered the man who had delivered the envelope, the older man who said Margaret sent him. I asked Margaret if she knew him. Her silence was answer enough. The man wasn't a stranger. He was Daniel's uncle's former business partner. Margaret had hired him years ago to help search for Rebecca. But if he was working for Daniel's uncle, then he could have been the one watching us. Suddenly, the photograph in my mailbox made sense. We returned home with the police. The black SUV was gone. But inside the house, something had changed. A drawer in Daniel's office was open. Documents were scattered across the floor. Whoever had entered hadn't stolen money or electronics. They had taken only one thing: the notebook Margaret had given me. Daniel looked at me. "They know we have it." I realized the notebook wasn't just evidence. It contained names and transactions that could expose everyone involved. We handed everything we had to the police. But there was still one person missing from the story: Rebecca. 2 days later, Rebecca appeared at a police station. She looked older, thinner, and exhausted. But she was alive. She told investigators that Daniel's uncle had threatened her after she discovered the financial records. She had disappeared voluntarily because she believed Daniel would be blamed if she stayed. Then Rebecca revealed the final secret. She had never believed Daniel was involved. In fact, she had contacted Margaret years ago because she wanted her to protect him. Margaret had misunderstood. She thought Rebecca was warning her that Daniel was dangerous. The truth was the opposite. Rebecca had spent years gathering evidence. The notebook was only part of it. She had recordings proving Daniel's uncle had planned to frame Daniel for the financial crimes. And there was one recording that shocked everyone. It captured Daniel's father admitting that he had ordered someone to follow Rebecca before she disappeared. The investigation moved quickly. Daniel's uncle was arrested, along with several former employees involved in the scheme. The evidence finally explained everything: the secret phone, the warnings, the surveillance, and the messages. But I still couldn't forget Margaret's words. "If you love him, you'll leave him." A week later, I visited Margaret alone. She apologized through tears. "I thought leaving him would save you." I told her I understood. Then she smiled sadly. "You were the first person Daniel ever loved enough to fight for." For the first time, I realized she hadn't been my enemy. She had been terrified of losing her son. Months later, Daniel and I were still together. Our marriage wasn't magically perfect. We had to rebuild the trust that secrecy had damaged, but we did it. Rebecca moved to another state and started a new life. Daniel's uncle went to prison, and Margaret finally stopped looking at me like I was someone who might take her son away. Looking back, I understand why my mother-in-law told me to leave her son. She wasn't trying to destroy my marriage. She was trying to save my life. She knew a secret Daniel had spent years hiding, and she was willing to make me hate her if it meant keeping me safe. Sometimes, the person standing between you and the truth isn't your enemy. Sometimes, they're the only person trying to protect you.